Everybody, it's your boy G.Taylor, Retro GT, Retro underscore GT, back for another episode of the G.Taylor Show. I have a special guest with me today, where we'll be talking about a bunch of different things pertaining to the relationship of black men and women. Special guest is on the G.Taylor Show, Pearl Robinson, licensed clinical social worker down in Texas. How are you today?
I am doing well. So happy and excited to be here. Yep.
Got you. I'm glad that we was able to connect and you was able to hop on this show and discuss.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so me and Pearl met at CSW-E conference last fall. Ran into each other. She was doing a workshop or supporting one of your folks. I don't know. You were doing one of the two, right?
Uh-huh.
And I was doing my workshop, and we ran across each other in passing. And so, what's been great is that since CSW-E, I've met and connected with so many other folks in social work, but also doctoral students as well. She's in her DSW program. She has her own private practice. And so we just crossed paths and said we was going to connect this year. And so she came up with a wonderful idea to have a conversation about relationships in the Black community, how we can best, serve and best work with one another in an aspect. And it's good because her private practice serves mostly Black women. And I was formerly in private practice and I served mostly Black men. And so I think this would be a good opportunity to have a conversation, answer some questions, some burning questions, and just kind of hopefully, share the dialogue that help the people going forward. So that is where Pearl Robinson. But Pearl, let me do this.
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell people where you're from, what you do, what you're about, and what you got going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. You did an amazing job. So I am a BOI, and for those who don't know, that means born on the island. I was born and raised in Galveston, Texas, and then moved around in Texas and eventually landed in a city called Pearland, Texas, where I started my private practice about 8 years ago. And we serve women of color. And we absolutely love what we do. I have about 5 other clinicians who work in my practice. And I really enjoyed your workshop at CSW-E because you talked a lot about, Black men and the suicide rate, and how partners can potentially, create this emotional safety. And we hear that a lot, right? In terms of the conversation around gender wars and men versus women, specifically in the African American community. But I thought it would be a really good idea because I have women coming to my practice like, well, I'm trying to talk to him, and he shuts down. And I'm like, well, sis, how are we saying it? What's our approach?
Right.
And then, just kind of hearing what you're passionate about. I thought it would be a really good collaboration for two therapists who are passionate about this work and about the community to come together to just, have a discussion around like practical strategies because I'm very solution focused, right? So I hear, creating emotional safety, but that's really big when you don't know what you're doing, you know? Especially when you don't even feel emotionally safe within yourself. How do you then create that for someone else, but not wanting to put the relationship piece to the side as you heal? You're trying to do all of these things at the same time, and it can be overwhelming. So I thought that this would be a really good collaboration between you and I. And I'm excited about being here.
Yeah.
And then also with my DSW program, my research is on internalized oppression and restorative practices for African American women. And so we know that when our relationships, we're very community centered, right? And so that means when our relationships with our family, specifically our Black men, whether it is our fathers, our intimate partners, our siblings, uncles, cousins, when those things are unsteady, it makes our nervous system unsteady, right? So just thinking about it from even a self-care piece for African American women, how can you take care of yourself, in those moments when you and your Black man, whether it's your father or your cousin or sibling or intimate partner, when y'all are not seeing eye to eye? And how do we usher in forgiveness so that we can stay connected in a way that moves the collective forward? And so I'm so excited, right, about being here and having this discussion with you and taking some time out to have this discussion with me.
Absolutely, Per. I appreciate that. Even when you brought it to me, I was like, "This is a perfect opportunity, yeah, to do that." And I got told Per, I was like, "Man, I had been wanting to do more of the kind of the relationship conversation or just spouse situation because a lot of black guys, a lot of brothers do, at least informally in my practice, they did come in having those conversations about how
Mhm.
to get better communicate or going through a strife with their spouse and how to, navigate that. And then on the flip side, I would get black women as well wanting a black man perspective on how to, manage their relationship. So I think it's a good opportunity and something positive, I think, for us in the community around this topic because it is a hot button topic. I've seen all the different things
Yeah.
on it, say 50-50
Yeah.
split, then should you pay for that, say all
Yeah,
this,
exactly.
you know what I'm
I'm
saying?
not
So,
going to Cheesecake Factory. I'm like,
right.
come on now, sis, go to the Cheesecake Factory.
Yeah, cheesecake was hey, Cheesecake Factory was a luxury item back in the day, boy.
Okay.
We got new expensive taste nowadays.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but I also want to so we'll have some conversations and fun with this today. Make sure you like, share, subscribe to the podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all your digital streaming platforms. We're also on YouTube under the G.Taylor Show, so you can subscribe there as well. And if you got questions or comments after this episode comes out, or you want to learn more, please feel free to reach out, message me or Pearl on our digital. We'll have our social medias up, things like that, YouTube pages, stuff like that. Pearl is in private practice, so if you have somebody in Texas, are you any of states that you are licensed in to
No,
practice?
we just in Texas right
Just in
now.
Texas.
Yeah.
Gotcha,
Hmm.
gotcha, gotcha. And so if looking for, getting some therapy services or things like that, or wanting to, reach out to Pearl for therapy service, reach out to her private practice and have that. We should probably do another episode as well around the business of private practice. So you've been in business for 8 years, and I
Yes.
would love to do that episode as well because a lot of social workers want to learn about the business and the private practice
Right.
side and what that entails. So we'll reconvene on that later
Yes. Yes.
on.
Absolutely.
So yeah, absolutely. Okay. So let's get started. Let's get
Yeah.
started. What do you what's the first question you want to tackle today?
So I think I mentioned it earlier, just this conversation around, creating emotional safety,
Mhm.
for your spouse. And that could be on either side
Yeah.
for, the your wife or your husband or your partner.
Mhm.
What does that look like? When we really flush it out, what does that mean when we say, create emotional safety for our partner?
Yeah. I think we got to start with the definition of emotional safety, or this what we define it as. And I look at emotional safety as can I share my emotions or be vulnerable with you in this space, right?
Mhm.
Can I trust you with my emotions to not be, hurt or invalidated or dismissed, right?
Yeah.
And so I think for guys the first thing is that do I even know the emotional vocabulary to put to some of the things that I am feeling?
Right.
And a lot of times guys don't, right? They don't
Mhm.
know what those things are, or they only know like, happiness or sadness or anger, right? And that's it.
Mhm.
But what
Mhm.
about the other feelings and emotions that come up that, make you feel how you feel, right? And then also, you know, if I'm saying these things, are you going to use them against me? If I'm
Mhm.
saying I feel less of a man or I feel sad or I feel depressed, are you going to use that against me going forward? I've heard that conversation so much,
Yeah.
not just from social media, but from in groups, having community conversations and then working with guys around that. They feel like, you know, I'll say that and then it get used against me down the line. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And so that emotional safety looks at, I think for me, is like not just in the moment, right? Of making sure that I'm able to express myself without being, dismissed or not invalidated, but in the long term, right?
Mhm.
You're not going to use that as a weapon against me and my masculinity and my perceived masculinity and my manhood. So I think that's the piece where defining that emotional safety. How would you define it in that sense?
Yeah, I would agree with you. It is just the opportunity to be your whole and complete self,
Mm-hmm.
right? And also I'll take it a step further. I think it's also the patience and the opportunity to get it wrong sometimes,
Okay.
and how you recover from that, within your relationship. I think so many times when we come up with these concepts like creating emotional safety, or attunement, we think about it from a space of perfection. Like, okay, if I
Yeah.
conceptualize it, and this is the way that I'm going to show up in my relationship, that every single time, I'm going to show up in that way. And I think that that's an unrealistic expectation that we put on ourselves. And it's an unrealistic expectation that we put on our partners. Thinking about it from like a social work hat, right? Like, we're all coming into relationship with these lived experiences. A lot of times we've had previous heartbreaks, and not heartbreaks even just from intimate partner relationships, but
Yeah.
our moms, our
Yeah.
dads, and so the way that we see love and relationship and connection, sometimes it is distorted, if you will.
Right.
And so when we're creating emotional safety, at least when I think about it, it's also the language. That's number one.
Yeah.
So I agree with you on that. That's number one. But then also the space to say, okay, I'm trying to show up in this relationship in a very different way than what I saw,
Hmm.
growing up, what I see on television, what the podcasters
Right.
and the YouTubers are saying. And so I have to conceptualize. There has to be some imagery work around there. Like, what do I look like? What do I sound like when I'm
Yeah.
creating that?
Yeah.
And then also the understanding that I may not get it right, but a commitment to keep trying it.
That's
Um,
key.
and for your partner to understand that you are committed to the change.
That's key. That's key. I'm glad you said that because the patience piece gets left out of everything. The
Everything.
patience, yeah, right? Like the patience and the perfectionism piece is. And when you said the perfection, I was like, man, that is so good because I think even in that space, right? Like we all at some point are just operating from this space of perfectionism. I
Yeah.
think that does hinder how we see view in relationships, how we view ourselves, how we see ourselves. If we're not doing it in a perfect manner, then
Mhm.
it's wrong,
Yeah.
right? And I think about the emotional safety piece. I don't know what I don't know until I know it, right? Until you
Mhm.
tell me that
Mhm.
that's wrong. Do you
Mhm.
tell me that that is not the way I want that, right? Do you tell me the
Mhm.
things I like and things I don't like? And then that distorted viewpoint of how I view relationships. I always tell guys this: how was your parents growing up, right?
Mhm.
What did you see? Because a lot of times we're going to model that same behavior when we get
Mhm.
into our own relationships or in adulthood.
Right.
So if you've seen dad never really express no love or compassion to mom, but paid the bills all the time and never said anything and went to the den and sat down, then you are automatically kind of internalize that sometimes and say, well, that's my expectation. And it might not be said until it's not happening. And then there's an argument. Right.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I think about, man. I was sitting there reflecting one day and I was like, to be present and intentional with every task that we do in the moment is very exhausting. And for a lot of us, we do not have the time, energy, or capacity to be that intentional or present in the moment because of all the things that we got going on.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
And so when we start talking about emotional safety or what it takes to, practice emotional safety, you're right, Pearl. Like it's going to take patience. It's
Mhm.
going to take, what I'm saying, the removal of that perfectionism so that we can create and craft this space for one another so we can feel supported and validated. And if we can't do that, then we probably shouldn't be in a relationship just yet.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. In relationships, I think that there's a huge misconception um around relationships because there's a lot of rhetoric like, well, relationships are easy. I completely, well, wholeheartedly disagree with that. I always say there is no person on the face of this earth that I agree with 100% of the time. I love my mama,
Right.
right? But, I love my dad, but
Yeah.
there are moments I just don't agree with them, right? And so ushering in some of that critical thinking
Mm-hmm.
when we are in relationship, it does take a level of intentionality. So really being mindful about, your mental fortitude, your emotional bandwidth in these times when you're experiencing discontentment with your partner is going to be really, really important. I do want to invite another word into the conversation. The reflective listening
Yes.
piece is really important
Yeah.
because relationships, whether they're intimate or they're with family members and friends, they're supposed to serve as a mirror.
Right.
And when we hear that, even you know this, even in the therapeutic space, people are quick to jump on a bandwagon for a positive emotion,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Things that feel good, but positive emotion and negative emotion were both created for us to experience as humans, but we
Mm-hmm.
shy away from that negative stuff. We shy away from that feedback, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But when we go into relationship, especially intimate relationship, there has to be an understanding that this person is here, sit here to shine a light on who you are, the really good stuff, and then also the not so good stuff. So being open, right, to hear what it is that they're saying, being able to assess the intentionality, because sometimes the impact and the intent just is not
It's
congruent.
good. It's not good. Yeah.
It's just not. You don't intend to do something, but the way that it lands is the way that it lands.
Right.
Um, but that reflective listening piece helps you to really muddle through what it is that your partner is trying to communicate to you. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we just talk to respond
Yeah. Yeah.
because we're not trained to sit with our thoughts and not call our homegirl. And let me tell you what he said to me,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Same for the
um,
partners. You know what I'm saying? Let me hit the group
Yeah,
chat real quick.
it's hard, for some people to do some of that reflective listening and pull out, what our partner is trying to say to us. And if we hit it from that perspective, I think that there's more opportunity for us to be teammates in this thing.
Yeah. I think the other thing with guys is that, listening to not respond, but listening to hear. And then
Hmm.
the thing about it, when you go back to the emotional safety piece, is and including reflective listening, is that when I'm listening, I'm not necessarily listening from the perspective if I understand it, right? Because the thing
Hmm.
about it is that when I understand, let me take it back. I'm not listening from the perspective of I'm trying to fix in that moment, right?
Hmm.
Or what I would do, what I wouldn't have responded that way. Oh, it don't bother me that much, so it shouldn't bother you. When we get into that back and forth game, and trust me, I've been part of that myself, right? Where I
Yeah,
get into the well,
yeah,
it ain't that big of a deal for me, so I don't know why you tripping about it. You know what I'm
right.
saying? And you hit the homeboys or you hit the group chat and you say, man, ain't she tripping over this? It ain't even that big of a deal. You go to the community that's going to say, yeah, it ain't that big of a deal because it don't matter that much to me. You then again dismiss or invalidate your
Yeah.
spouse's feelings or partner's feelings in that moment, and then we get into this back and forth game of, well, that's not that big of a deal, so I'm not going to do it. But
Hmm.
your partner is asking you, right, this how this thing that you do makes me feel, can you change your behavior and do something else,
Yeah.
right? Versus I'm not asking you to change. I'm not asking you if you feel the same way. I'm asking you a request, right?
Yeah.
And that goes into the expectation pieces, right? Of what is the expectation behind what is being asked, and is it being comprehended, and then also how we saying it or landing it, and if we are taking that constructive criticism in a sense, because if we love this person, we care for this person, we should be able to take the good with and the bad from them.
Mhm.
um are we personalizing or internalizing it, or are we really receiving it reflective wise to hearing what that person is saying? And I think for a lot of guys, that's out the window, because again, that's not that behavior has never been modeled. I
Yeah.
I've see that and hear that so much from guys. How does your dad respond to your mom
Hmm.
if they were present? And it's not a lot. It's not enough to work there. So then you have adults 20, 30, 40, 50
Mhm.
that hadn't have a behavior model, but is now costing them in their own relationship and their personal relationship going forward. And so they have to build from scratch, but we also building from scratch from like 10, 15, 20 years of remodeling from that
Yeah.
space. Yeah.
Yeah. And what you're talking about right now is a couple of things. I'm thinking as you're talking, this whole idea of intergenerational
Yes.
trauma.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when we look at it from a lens of, just emotional abuse,
Yep.
psychological abuse. And to
Yep.
be honest with you, because we didn't have that language back then, we
Yep.
didn't even know that that's what that was.
Right.
you know,
Exactly. Right.
and so we carry these things into our relationships and we wonder why they're not working. Is because, we have subscribed to some abusive behavior,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
some really abusive behavior. But I'm also thinking, like, as you're talking about this whole idea of, now I'm going to use a trigger word. I'm just telling you right now, Gary.
Okay. Okay.
This whole idea of submission, right?
Yes. Yes.
And for African American women, we know that that is a trigger word.
Right. Right.
And so I just want to ask you, in this safe space that we're in, as a Black man, when you think about, your partner being submissive, or if you're a man of faith and a woman is a woman of faith, what exactly do you feel like that means and what that looks like? I think that that's an important conversation for us to have in this space.
Yeah. Now from a biblical standpoint, as a Christian, I think, the submission piece comes from, submission to God first and
Hmm.
foremost. That
Yeah.
should be the foundation.
Hmm.
And so the man submits to God, and to the household submits to God, and then the wife submits to the man who submits to God, and they both still submit to God. He is the head in that space. But then there's still submission to my wife, right, as a
Hmm.
husband,
Yeah.
um, and vice versa, right?
Right.
But what does that look like? It looks like this kind of shared understanding, this shared governance of how we show up for one another, right? And then also how we model our behaviors, how we lead our household, how we lead our Christian life from, that biblical principle. So that is from the biblical standpoint, I think. And so sometimes these conversations that I see around these topics get mixed and muddied because we're speaking from different perspectives. If
Yeah.
you're a Christian, is this the biblical side of it, right? But if you're
Yes.
not a Christian, but you're maybe still on the fence of about that, what that looks like, then it's hard to engage in that practice, unless you learn more about it, or really, in it as well. And so I look at it as well, like when I look at it from like that twofold perspective, right? You know what I'm saying? From the Christian backside, or for the religion side, and then also from like the worldly side, in the sense of just everyday workings. And so that submission piece is just the direction, the orders, the behaviors, the morals, the values, who you
Mhm.
are as a person, who you see yourself as a husband or a spouse. How do you see your spouse, and as a spouse, and what do you see in her, right? You know what I'm saying? What is God directing you and your house to be doing, right? That's the
Mhm.
submission piece.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So that from a
Yeah.
biblical side, I'm gonna stop right there real quick. That answer your question, then I might pivot to the next side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that answers my question.
Okay.
And I think that you bring up a really good point. Like, when we have these conversations around submission, especially in my private practice working with women of color, it's like I'm clenching my pearls, because what are you even talking about? You're not
Right.
gonna change me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna show up the way that I show up, take it
Yeah.
or leave it,
Yeah.
all of these things. And being able to pull it out, right, from a
Mm.
Christian perspective, or whatever faith
Right.
you believe or subscribe to from their perspective, but then also from a psychological perspective, when I hear the word submission, I'm thinking about boundaries.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What are your non-negotiables? And we should all have some of those.
Mm-hmm.
What does respect look like?
Mm-hmm.
and sound like,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
For you and for your partner. And then that compassion piece. And so we have so much conversation, in the therapeutic space at Pinnacle of Purpose when we talk about their respect, because we know for men, respect is really important.
Right.
And I asked them, well, how does your husband want to be respected? What does respect even look like for your man, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
um it is, such a broad concept. And I always challenge my women to ask the question. Go home,
Yeah.
when y'all are eating dinner, or y'all are in a good place, and just ask, baby, what does respect mean for you? Because sometimes we're so overwhelmed with the submission piece,
Yeah.
and showing the respect piece. Really and truly, when you have the conversation, it's like simple stuff, you
Yeah.
know.
It really is.
Um, yeah, so I just kind of wanted to highlight that in conversation as well. Um,
So I'll shift with you as well. That's why I wanted to put a pause there, because that's my standard of how I leave my household. If I'm talking with a Christian couple, that's what I'm going to tell them, right? If you
mhm,
are of the faith. But then if you talk about the psychological aspect, this piece, it kind of goes back into the expectation piece. One of the things I used to tell guys all the time is like, have you said she's doing this, you said she's doing that. Have you told her how that makes you feel? And
mhm,
9 times out of 10, they're like, nah, I haven't told her that.
mhm.
Okay. So why? Why? Because how would she know what she's supposed to know? No, she doesn't. She's not a mind reader. And,
Yeah.
and this whole notion, you know what I'm saying? Like, okay, well, she's a woman. She should know. No, she shouldn't. She's a human being who just learns just like everybody else, right? And so
Mhm,
we have to communicate that. And so a lot of times guys will not communicate that, but when they get to the homies or they're talking in group chat, it's like, these are the things that I'm feeling, or she's not doing, but never expressing them.
mhm,
I developed this model, and that looks like when we have these conversations around communication, comprehension, and expectation. We all have expectations, whether said or not.
yeah.
And when they are not being met, we kind of almost use a penny system to say, okay, well, that's one thing they ain't doing. That's one thing. But it's so slight and subconscious
Yep.
that,
Mhm,
you know what I'm saying, it don't matter in the moment. But then by the time it gets to something that, is really, really, it could be something small or minute, but if it's built up over time, like interest builds, then
mhm,
this one small thing could mean so much. Going back to your point of, oh, well, she don't do dishes. Okay. And then that was the one spilling point that just said, I'm done with this relationship. She don't do this. She don't do that. And it was like, well, it's all over because she don't do dishes. She don't clean up. And it's like, well,
mhm,
you could clean up too. So you can
mhm.
do dishes too. So what's that? And we go into that submission piece around the expectations and then roles.
Oh,
Again,
yeah.
historical pieces. How did my mom show love? How did my dad show love? How did they run their house? Oh, mom did the cooking, cleaning, all that. Dad did this. So I expect that. And sometimes for a lot of guys, they never explored that,
Mhm,
to sit there and ask, what do I expect out of my spouse?
mhm,
But when it doesn't happen, now it's a flag, right? Now it's an offense. And
mhm,
then it gets into this back and forth, conversation. Oh, you don't do this and you don't do that, or you don't respect me. But
mhm,
you never explicitly said what you
mhm.
expect out of me. You just assume. And so we do a lot of assumptions. And I think for a lot of the assumptions is just for us to, like you said kind of earlier, the avoidance piece. Because if we have to address these things, especially the negative issues, then that means we're accountable for the behaviors that we actually are doing to ourselves, but then also to our spouses.
Yeah, that's good.
Mhm.
And when we get in those conversations, oftentimes because we've let it build up,
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
the conversations are so intense,
Yeah.
right? Like we arguing about dishes, but really and truly it is,
Right.
um, I don't feel appreciated,
Yeah.
you know?
And we can never get to the root cause of
And
it.
we can't never get there. Exactly. So it just kind of brings in that language, it
Yep.
brings in the reflective listening piece, being transparent and being vulnerable. But it's also leading me to this space of when it is intense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I always say it's not if we disagree or if we argue, it's when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because it will happen,
Yeah.
right? And
For
we
sure.
know that healthy relationships, we're supposed to have um disagreements,
Mm-hmm.
right? But
Mm-hmm.
when that happens, how do we express ourselves in a way where our boundaries are understood, a person can hear, comprehend,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh express expectation, but then also like usher in this space for kindness and honesty without throwing slugs,
Yeah. Yeah.
or what is the word that I want to use? Degrading our partner,
Yeah.
because that's a thing, you
Yeah. It
know.
is. Yeah.
That's a thing. So
Yeah.
what would you say about that?
You know, when I first got married, some of the my seasoned folks who are and also been married and been around for a while was like, don't go to bed angry. Don't go to bed upset with your partner,
Hmm.
which in theory makes sense, but
Hmm.
I might need to go to bed. Like I
Yeah,
might need
yes.
to remove
Listen.
myself and get myself together. Be, you know, before I say something out the way, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
I'm super angry. And then one of the situations is that, okay, well, why am I so angry? Right?
Hmm.
Why am I so angry? And
Hmm.
so I've noticed, not just with myself, but then over conversations, right? Right. The weight of the world as a black man in America and navigating that, you right, and navigating this emotional response to the relationship does eat at you. And if you don't do something about it, then 9 times out of 10, the spouse or your loved one is going to catch the brunt of it. So you might be
Hmm.
responding to some stuff that has built up over time with spouse, but then
Yeah.
all these other external factors that have nothing to
Hmm.
do with your spouse, right?
Hmm.
And you're just firing off on her or him at that certain period of time, and that's not fair, right?
Hmm.
And so I think when we get into a heated argument, my whole thing about this as a reformed person who has dealt with anger issues, I know everybody thinks that I've never had that. I'm so calm and cool, but I've dealt with anger issues in the past and still deal with it to this day, a lot more mild mannered than what I was. But nothing's going to get solved if we're yelling at each other or degrading each other.
Right.
The root of the cause of why we are arguing is going to get dismissed. And
Yeah.
so my recommendation to guys is that every time we get into that space, if it gets elevated, let's take a time out. Let's take a breather. Let's walk away. Let's go downstairs.
Yeah.
Let's separate for a little bit. Come back when we're more level headed and then have the conversation. It is
Yeah.
going to be very hard to have a conversation about something that needs to be addressed or being done if we're both super angry or frustrated. We're throwing out different terminology from one another. We start cutting deep because we know we can do that to each other when it
Yes,
get
you
stuff
can.
hit the fan. We start cutting deep and saying some out of
Yeah.
pocket stuff that what I'm saying we know about each other because what I'm saying we've been with each other. But I
Yeah.
always support the separation piece of just somebody go outside, somebody go for a drive, somebody
Yeah.
within reason, within safety reasons. But you know nothing is going to get solved if we're both at a 10.
Yeah.
We need to
Hmm.
bring it underneath a 5, at least, and have some good conversation. If it starts going
Hmm.
left, let's take a pause, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I mean, I know some people don't like to walk out on it, or some people don't like to, go mute or just don't have say nothing to say. But I would rather you do that, blow off some steam, come back, decompress, so you can say how you really feel. Because at that moment, you're only speaking from that how frustrated and upset you are.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that's coming from somebody who's dealt with anger issues, and processing that and
Yeah.
has spaz in those moments, right? But
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest ways to start.
Yeah. And full disclosure, I'm glad that you said that, because full disclosure, I think a lot of times people say, "Oh, well, you're a therapist,
Right.
namaste,
Yeah.
Like, no.
And you're the best, like the most, say serene people
Exactly.
ever.
We all experience human emotion,
Yeah.
right? And a
Yeah.
lot of these strategies that we teach our clients are things that we've had to live ourselves.
True.
And one thing that I just kind of learned along my journey and then through research and studying different modalities is, that whole self-soothing piece is important because
Yes.
sometimes you're in a relationship with people who are really quick processors, right?
Yeah.
And there's an emotional detachment so they can sit in that space like much faster than
Yeah.
you can.
Yeah.
And then you have other people who are slow processors and are very connected to the emotion.
Right.
And
Hmm.
so that attachment theory, understanding what your attachment style is,
Yeah.
especially for my women who have like some daddy issues,
Hmm.
is going to be really important because if you have somebody who is a slow processor and you're wanting to resolve it or fix it right then and there, then you run the potential of escalating it.
Yes.
And so I like that you said it's okay to go to sleep on
Mm.
the 6th.
Yeah.
You may need that time just to like regulate your own nervous
Yeah.
system so you can enter that space because there's going to be some discontentment there. And so I really do work with my women, and full disclosure, things that I've also had to practice around this emotional regulation piece,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And what do you do in those moments to self soothe yourself so that you can move yourself out of that very emotional space over into that logical space so
Hmm.
that you can stay kind, so that you can stay warm, so that you can incorporate some of those reflective listening practices that we talked about earlier and come up with a solution on how you're going to move forward. That's really important. That's a really important conversation to have
Yeah.
when we've had bad relationship after bad relationship, so it's like, is he about to leave?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or you are a victim of domestic violence, and it's like, well, if I say this, is he going to get physically aggressive?
Yes.
And he may not ever have presented himself like that before, but because of your past experiences, we got to understand some of that is coming to the space. And I think that that's a huge misconception too, that we're not bringing any baggage to
Yeah.
the new relationship. That
Yeah.
is a bunch of malarkey.
Yeah. Yeah.
We all bring something,
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
space. And
Yeah.
we're all, at one stage of healing or another, which is why I feel like that patience piece is so important. You have to have your non-negotiables, but you also have to understand that you're bringing a whole nother person into your space. And so you're gonna have to work with it a little bit.
Yeah. I think that, and this is a layered conversation. I think that people want quick fixes and don't think that we have to
Yes.
work with these things, man. You have to, a lot of this initially is you learning yourself,
Oh, that's good.
right?
That's
And
good.
knowing what, activates you, what your boundaries are, what are your non-negotiables. And for a lot of people, they don't know that, right?
Yeah.
I used to ask a question for a lot of guys, what makes you happy?
Mhm.
And they couldn't answer it, or it took a long time to answer it. But we could
Mhm.
always point out what makes you sad, mad, or upset. And so, asking questions like that, super simple, like what makes you happy, is something that, what I'm saying, you got to learn yourself. And folk, we don't take the time to learn ourselves. And the
Mhm.
piece of that emotional regulation is so important because, again, you could, and this is something that I've adopted myself, I might be responding to the day and
Mhm.
not you.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I done popped off the handle because of the day, because I'm a
Mhm.
black man, because I'm, the weight of the world, because of bills, because of stress, because of, just trying to exist, right? I might have responded from that.
Mhm.
And so that emotional regulation piece, before you speak, before you say she's getting on my nerves, she pissing me off, she's not doing what I need her to do. Before you get there, you have to ask yourself, is this her, or is this something that I have not addressed with myself? Took some stress time to decompress, take some time to deep breathe, go do some activities to chill out, relax. Have I done that? Majority of the time, when you take the time to go do something for yourself, or practice some self-care, you'll
Mhm.
realize that situation that you was thinking about ain't that big of a deal.
It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you forgot about it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, but again, that patience and perseverance and a time to sit with that, to be intentional about that. A lot of folks are not, they're not. I wouldn't say not doing it, but don't have the capacity to do it,
Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
that's coming
Mhm.
from somebody that that's a trained therapist, former therapist, a clinician, a social worker, and I think and rooted in faith, things like that. But have been around the block, have seen some things. Be married 10 years this year. In October.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. But you know, have seen some stuff, right? You know what I'm saying? Dealt with some stuff. My parents divorced, and I've also been through 3 years of therapy.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
feel what I'm saying? So that was 3 years where I had to learn myself, get to know myself, and work through. And I tell guys this is that you're gonna also have to take the time to learn yourself and understand, because then you can do all of that, Pearl, right?
Yeah.
Get everything down pat, then your spouse changes because of
Yes.
life.
Yes.
There's a
That's
maybe
good.
somebody passes away, something
Mhm.
else is going on, right?
Mhm.
Medical, you know what I'm saying, career, whatever. And then that changes who they are, what you initially, and then you have to adjust.
Yes.
You know what
Mhm.
I'm saying? And so this is something that's not just a one off type, thing. You have to constantly be learning and growing and working on yourself. There are periods of times where you should be resting and just, letting things exist,
Right.
but you gotta do the work first to let things exist sometimes.
Exists. Yeah, exactly. I'm so glad you said that,
Hmm.
because a lot of conversation that I have with my clients is there's a huge misconception, when you get married, you go to your bridal shower, you get advice from people who have been,
Right.
married and seasoned in this, this space. And it was like, oh, you and your partner are going to grow together. But what they don't tell you is, and I learned through my previous marriage, that yes, you grow, but you grow at different rates,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
I may be growing right now in this season of my life and participating in therapy and healing some of that childhood trauma, but my partner may not be there yet,
Yeah.
right? They may not be open to that yet. So, how do I continue along my healing journey, and wait for my partner to get to where I am? And then, like you mentioned, something may happen and I change again, or
Yeah.
my partner changes again.
Yes.
So allowing that space, for growth. This is why, even in the dating field, I talk to women a lot about this whole codependency,
Hmm.
right? There needs to be some level of autonomy
Yeah.
still in that thing,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, because that will still be true once you're in relationship and once you're married, because we're all on this separate journey. And how do we show up in relationship when we're not in the same season of life? So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah. You because again, that kind of goes into like why you got married, right? If you're not able to support that loved one during those moments where it's up and down or different seasons, right? Or have the patience. That patience piece is like super important, man. Like I
Yeah.
think a lot of us are just impatient. And
Yes.
that I understand it. Like I'm an impatient person at times as well. I've worked on my
Mhm.
patience. Once I worked on my patience, a lot of things in life was just like, all right, well, things will happen when it needs to happen, what I'm saying, within due time. Um, but
But I
okay.
blame social media about for that. And I don't mean to cut you off, but I
Yeah,
think that we romanticized relationships,
yeah.
right?
Mm,
To look a certain way and be a certain way. If it doesn't look like the highlight reel, if we're not communicating, if we're not traveling,
yeah,
if we're not, we don't have our bedroom set up with the roses and
yeah.
all of these
Yeah,
things in the
yeah,
way that we see, oh, it's not real. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so yes, I agree with you that patience piece to learn your partner and the ebbs and flows of what that looks like, even, with your finances,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you may not have the finances to travel with your man and be on the balcony with
Right.
somebody's son,
Yeah. True.
summer 2025.
Right.
But you can, go to a park, ride around,
Do something
with
local.
somebody's
Yeah.
son,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that it's less real because you're not subscribing to like this social media way of what love and relationship is supposed to look like. So that patience piece, man, I think is just
And the
huge.
that's the comparison piece too, right? Where we're comparing
Yes.
ourselves to other couples and stuff like that. And I just know like, the way me and my wife work, like it's some folks wouldn't be able to do it. You know what I'm saying? The way we operate, you know what I'm saying,
Mhm.
and how we show up. But those some of those questions I've asked her, when we initially got together was like, what I'm saying, this is what I'm, looking to do in my career and my personal goals. Are you open to that? You know what I'm saying? She said, unfortunately, she said yes. You know what I'm saying? She was like, and then she like came down later. She's like, I didn't know it was gonna be all of this, right? But you know what I'm saying? But she had that conversation. So when I tell to,
Yeah.
when I talk to usually I'm talking to men is like after the fact where like when it's stuff to hit the fan. And
Yeah.
if I get the opportunity to talk to young couples or couples that are getting ready to get into marriage, I try to share them with that is that, shift things will shift quickly in the marriage and it will test you and you're gonna have to say, well, you say you was committed to this person, but then how, show me that commitment because,
Yeah.
through death to his part, but then also what's going on and how are you showing up, how are you adjusting? I think one of the things I talk about, especially in my book about is like when me and my wife got married, we we had our daughter the next year, but then
Mm.
we also lost loved ones each
Wow.
year for the first 5 years of our marriage.
Oh my goodness.
So she lost a grandfather. I lost an uncle. She lost a grandfather. I lost another grandfather. Then I lost both my grandmothers, and so that right there, like, wait a
Yes.
minute, I didn't sign up for all this. I'm losing
Yeah.
the family
Right.
that I'm, married into, and things like that, and that shapes, how you view each other and how you grieve. And I know
Mhm.
for me, the grieving process changed me as a person, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so,
Mhm.
but to go through that for the first 5 years of marriage
Wow.
and still be here in year 10,
Yeah.
loving each other, supporting one another, showing up, you know what I'm saying? And God forbid we continue to keep doing that as we evolve and we grow. But it's tough, it's hard.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so when you start talking about that patience piece, when you start talking about,
Mhm.
we both work stressful jobs, right? We both,
Mhm.
she's a teacher, I'm a social worker. Like, you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it's, we have these different things. And so how you navigate that, and did we call to attention what's going on when it did happen versus letting it hit the fan?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
are we working on ourselves individually to make, because I tell guys this, you the marriage is an entity that you have to pour into, right?
Mhm.
And if you're not, or the relationship, you can go relation, and it shifts between the stages. So if we're in a talking stage, if we're just together, if we're in a engagement stage, and then we're in the marriage stage, and then it changes after we have kids, and then it
Yes,
goes
it
into different
does.
stages. So I don't think people conceptualize and understand these different stages of life that we are
Right.
all in, that
Mhm.
requires us to have patience and to shift and to adjust. And when we don't do that and we just sweep it under the rug, or we don't call to attention, have the conversation, then it builds up over time. And then that's where stuff goes left. You feel what I'm
Mhm.
saying? And
Mhm.
so I
Mhm.
want to be as intentional. I'm not perfect. I ain't perfect by
Mhm.
no means. I tell you that much. I definitely ain't.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
but when I had that conversation with guys, I'm like, yo, did you have the conversation yet? Or what are we doing to work towards that, or what are you doing to work to engage with
Mhm.
yourself, to learn yourself, to communicate that? Or did we just let this go by the wayside and just said, well, it'll work itself out? No, it's not going to work itself out.
Mhm. Mhm.
you know
Yeah.
I went off on a tangent. I forgot where I was going with that, but
No, that's okay. That's okay, but I I will say this. I will say
I do that
this because
sometimes.
I was thinking as you were talking about this whole forgiveness piece
Oh
that
yeah,
kept popping into my mind, right?
yeah,
Because you're talking about different seasons, a lot will happen.
yeah,
Um, from the time that you start dating till your children leave the home. It's gonna be a
yes.
whole lot of stuff that happens,
Oh yes.
you know? And so it's like, what does that mean for you? A man and a woman, right? I'm
Yeah.
just talking about relationship. What does forgiveness look like, sound like for you? So that when it's time for you to extend that to someone, you know how to navigate it. Because if you sweep things up under the rug,
Mm-hmm.
right, that's a lot of resentment that's building,
Yes. Yes.
so much resentment.
Yes.
And then when you get to a place, if you have not conceptualized what forgiveness looks like for you, when you get to that resentment piece, you don't even know how to muddle through that thing, and it clouds you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't even begin to lean into forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
So having real strategy around forgiveness, I think is just crucial just to human relationships because people are going to offend you.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Period, point blank.
Yeah.
And sometimes the deepest, the toughest offenses to endure are those that are inflicted by the people that we love. We can that
Mm-hmm.
work stuff. I mean, yeah, we may be pissed off and come home and
Right.
talk about it, but we can move past that.
Right. Right.
When it's coming from our loved ones and our partners, that forgiveness piece, like you got to strategize around that.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that again, your boundaries, right? Your boundaries, your
Mhm,
non-negotiables. Some things it's harder to forgive than others. But I mean, I want to say, like, if you are looking at forgiveness and forgiveness for others, you have to understand how to forgive yourself, right? For things
yeah,
that
that's
you do or
good.
have done for yourself, and
Yep.
practicing that, and what does that look like for yourself, so you can also learn how to do that for other people. If you don't know how to do that for yourself, it's going to be hard. You know what I'm saying,
Mhm.
to do that. Um, and then
And that's a
also,
word for perfectionist. I just want to put that right there. That's a whole word for people who operate in perfectionism
yeah,
because a lot of times they don't even know,
yeah.
how to make concessions for themselves. But
Yeah, you gotta
yeah.
forget. You gotta learn how to forgive yourself too. You know what I'm saying? But forgiveness, even from the biblical standpoint, it doesn't. You know what I'm saying? That's some of the things that we practice, but then also it doesn't. Love, when in that sense, doesn't hold no record of wrongdoings, right? And
Mhm.
so if I'm saying that I forgive you, right, and forgiveness is a daily practice, I believe that that's a wholehearted thing. It's a daily practice. But if I forgive you, right, then I also trust you that you're going to, one, hopefully not do it again, but then two, you're working to be better. Kind of going back
Mm.
again, we keep circling back to this patience thing.
Yeah, we keep. I think this is the highlight of the whole conversation,
Yeah, but it's real. Like,
but it's real.
I
Hmm.
forgive you, which means
Hmm.
I trust you to not offend me again, or not do that same behavior, or work towards being better. And I have to see some of that action, and steps taken towards that. And then that's, truly forgiveness. But I also am not going to hold it against you again. But a lot of
Hmm.
times that resentment, we just hold. It's like, oh, I forgive you, but I'm gonna move on. But in the back of your mind, you still holding on to,
Hmm.
yeah, you said that, but you gonna probably do this again. So I'm gonna hold this record next time. So when it pop up 2-3 years down the road, or a couple months down the road, you know what I'm saying? Well, it's something you ain't do right. I'm gonna say, oh well, you doing this, and you still doing the same thing back from 2 years ago. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Um, and that again breeds conflict. You know what I'm saying? Puts
Hmm.
people in that degrading piece, that you know not trusting your loved one to change.
Hmm.
You don't feel like
Hmm.
they can change. You don't feel like they can do better. And so I think forgiveness is for guys. But then for guys, man, their extension of forgiveness is very, it's a short leash. It's a
Well,
short leash.
talk to me about that. What do you mean when you say it's a short
I
leash?
just I'm the more conversations I've had with guys around that, right? It's like,
Hmm.
you can't. I think it's a masculinity thing, right? Like, if you cross me one time, or if you know disrespect me, or you pretty much lose my trust, then I can't trust you, so I can't practice the art of forgiveness. And that could be a masculinity
Mhm.
thing, right? Because it's just like, well, it's machismo type thing. That's how men operate. But
Mhm.
and the first time we've been vulnerable, or first time I showed you or told you what I want out of you, and you disregard that, then you're through, right? And that's the whole
Mhm.
patience piece, right? Working with your partner to be patient, to them learn to love you. So I think that the forgiveness piece is something that, from a masculine standpoint, we struggle with because we're not really taught the actual art of what forgiveness looks like ongoing.
Yeah,
You feel what I'm
that's
saying?
good.
It's always just a short term, one cross, two cross, I'm done with you,
Yeah,
versus
that's
the art
good.
and practice of forgiveness.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I think that for men, that's just some of that masculinity, that toxic masculinity that kind of seeps in,
Yeah.
what we having.
And as you say that, I'm thinking how that negatively impacts that emotional safety
Yes.
that we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to create.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like you got 2 times to create it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And that's not fair.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
not fair at times, because people are going to mess up. Like, people are not perfect, and so that
yeah,
it then kind of reinforces the perfectionism piece. And I
yeah.
think for men, like, we do want to be perfect, but
Mhm.
and then it's like, and that's some of that shame that has popped
Mm.
in, over time as we've grown up as, kids, and in our families, and in the streets with our homies. Like, what I'm saying, we want to be that perfect person that is that, got the swag and cool, calm, and
Mhm.
collected, and also don't want to be tried, and you don't try them and can fight and look a certain
Mhm.
way, get all the women, what I'm saying, or just be that person that's just cool, calm, and whatever.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, where does that shame come into place as well in your relationship if somebody has done something that you need to forgive them from, that's
Yeah,
goes against your mistrustment, or something that you haven't practiced, that something that you value for them, and they crossed you. What
yeah,
is your capacity to help breed forgiveness, or work with them on making sure that they know that this is something that bothers you, and not just from a
yeah,
masculine perspective. I think we
yeah.
take some of that masculinity, hyper masculinity sometimes, into our relationships, assuming that
Mhm.
it should work that way, and it's not that
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. That's fair. And even I think that's why it's important to understand your attachment styles too.
Yes.
And I kind of keep circling back to that because if you um have an avoidant attachment style,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's just even more reason for you to disconnect yourself.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then understanding, honestly, that that's what your partner has, and that's how your partner is showing up. So, what do you need to do in those moments to, foster an environment where, they feel safe returning back to you once they've been
Yeah.
able to process all of the things so that we don't perpetuate this cycle of stonewalling, which is a whole thing in relationships.
You're right. With a lot of guys,
So,
well, initially, I mean, that's their initial response sometimes, that they shut down, right?
mhm,
And
mhm,
sometimes that shut down is just like processing, but people want words, and it's like, well, I might not even have the words of vocabulary to speak what I'm going through, and maybe I
mhm,
shut down because this is the only way I know how to cope, right?
mhm.
And that could be subjective in the sense of if that's healthy or not, right? But if I'm stonewalling or shutting down, then what do I need to do to create that emotional safety so that you can express yourself, right?
Mhm,
Can that
mhm,
I can express some of that forgiveness in action, that I can see that will allow for that stonewall to be breaking down. You know what I'm saying? But that guard that guys put up a lot of times, is rooted in some of that experiences that we've had
mhm,
over time.
mhm,
Whether it's our parents or loved ones, friends. We bring that into the relationship again. That baggage that we bring, or another woman that we've dealt with, and that's how we process it. Let me try another way. You know.
mhm,
Mm-hmm.
mhm. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is such a complex,
Yes.
topic. We could just kind of keep talking for hours and hours,
Yeah.
because every time you say something,
Rightfully.
something else pops in my brain.
Rightfully so.
But I know that you have other things on your schedule, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And I just hope that the conversation is helpful and is
Yeah.
fruitful
Yeah.
for someone else's relationship or somebody else's journey
Yeah.
as they connect themselves in the collective,
Yeah.
So
Let me ask you this one question real quick.
yeah.
Do you believe that, and like when we start talking about folks who need to go to couples counseling, do you believe that they need to start individual first, or should they start couples first?
Oh, I always and me and my clinical director Ashley Day, we always have this conversation. They need to go to individual first.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah.
Same.
I really, really do. Because couples counseling requires a level of vulnerability,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have not been able to tap into that and be honest with yourself,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and be comfortable about being honest with yourself, there is no possible way
Mm-hmm.
that you're going to be able to do that in the therapeutic space.
Yeah.
And a lot of people believe that when I go to couples counseling, oh, I'm going to be there for 3 or 4 sessions and everything is going to, be healed and we'll be fine. And it's like, y'all been married 10 years. This is 10, 12 years of
Yes. Yes.
SHYT that's been
Yes.
going on.
Yes.
So, 3 sessions will, I promise you, will not work through it. And, I think that we mentioned this before, that self-awareness piece is really important. But I mean, this is one reason why people don't like to come to counseling, right? Because
Right.
as you experience, this therapeutic journey, you begin to understand that you can't control on other people. You can only control yourself.
Right.
And sitting with the good, bad, and the ugly and realizing, well, hold on, sis, I may be the problem. you know,
Yeah. It's me. It's me.
it's me. It's been
It's
me
me.
this whole
Yeah. Mhm.
time. That's not comfortable,
Yeah.
right? That's not a comfortable space to be in. So it's a lot of heavy lifting that has to happen, I think, from an individual perspective before you can even go into there. And there's this whole
Mhm.
conversation, full transparency. When I got divorced 9 years ago, I was very intentional about not looking for another relationship. And I remember
Right.
telling one of my girlfriends, my babies are small. I'm just not gonna do it. I'm a social worker. My spidey senses are up.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
ain't want that kind of drama in my home. And so when I re-entered, the dating scene, I would have men who would ask me, well, why you been, single for
Uh-huh.
so long?
Mhm.
And it really and truly was because I wanted to make sure that I was healed. There's a space
Yeah.
for like this healing journey and entering relationship. But you said it earlier, I don't think that people are comfortable enough with being alone.
Mm.
Like they
Mm.
just
Mhm.
that piece for them is just is difficult.
Yeah.
And so there's so many things, right? In
Yeah.
going to therapy and, spending that time by myself that I was able to see myself for myself and the missteps that were made,
Mhm.
even in that previous marriage. But I don't think that I would have been able to get there had I not done that individual therapy piece,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
um before entering anything. And so to answer your question, I think the individual therapy piece is really important. And we even work with couples, and we will recommend while you're in a therapeutic space to also be going to your own individual
Yeah.
counselors, because when we think about this kindness and honesty piece, here's what I'm gonna say.
Mhm.
Like, keeping it real can go real wrong.
Yeah. Yes. Left
It can
real
go
quick.
real wrong, left real quick. So
Yeah.
you come to your marriage or your relationship, or your friendships talking about you gonna keep it real, you're gonna be by yourself.
Mhm.
There are some things that you need to be able to process
Yeah.
and say out loud
Yeah.
that your partner didn't necessarily need to receive in the way that you first think it, right?
Yeah.
And so when you go to your individual counselor, that's your space to get all that foolishness out, you know?
Right. Right.
And you can go to your couples counseling session, with a plan for
Yeah. Yeah.
how
Yeah.
you can work with your partner and approach the problem.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's really important because what you can do, you can really do some lasting damage, showing up in your relationships with keeping it real.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
So,
we like to push that narrative around of just saying what we think comes to my mind. I ain't got no filter. I say what I want to say, and it is what it is. That's I'm real. I'm real. This and that and the third. And it's like, well, sometimes that's not also that doesn't show that you care,
right,
right? That you like what you say matters, right? Like I can joke with
right.
my wife, but there's some stuff I just can't say. You know what I'm saying? Because
It's
a
gonna be a
friction.
problem.
It's gonna be a problem. You know what I'm saying? So you still want to treat people with respect. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Especially your loved one and your spouse, right? And
yeah,
and that shows that you care. In that moment, that's not saying you're holding anything from that person.
exactly.
It's just saying that I'm not going. I love you. I respect you. There's some things
Mhm.
that I'm not going to say to you, right?
Yeah,
And there's some things I'm not going to say to you in the heat of the moment.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Because I trust and love and respect you. And so, and then for you to say that as a man is like, okay, well, then where's your forgiveness? Where's your filter at? What you don't have no other language, your emotional regulation to process. That's
yeah,
what emotional dysregulation is there. What are
yeah,
from your experiences? What are some things that are happening? Because that's not healthy communication either.
yeah.
You know.
And the other piece of that is I don't even really believe that,
Right.
right? Because when we expand our vocabulary,
Yeah.
and we have language, we begin to realize that our feelings are not facts. Like you may feel that way in
Hmm.
that moment, but that's not what's really happening.
Right.
And so being able to have a space with your own therapist to say, you know, I don't feel appreciated. He must think I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Who he think he talking to? All of the things that we say is going to help you flush that stuff out so you can bring the real issues.
To the problem.
Because
Yeah.
I do think that sometimes, we get caught up in that emotional piece. And once we really move back over into that logical spaces like that's really not how I feel.
Yeah. It
you
wasn't that
know,
deep. Yeah.
yeah, it really wasn't even that deep. So, yeah, I definitely think that you should start with the individual stuff first. And then you'll find, and I keep going back to this, but I think it's just a social worker in me.
Hmm.
But then you'll really find that, you know, my mama always made me feel like I wasn't good enough. That really ain't her. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
and that's why when I go to the grocery store and she told me to pick up cinnamon, I picked up nutmeg, all hell breaks
Yep.
loose because
Yep.
here I go
Yeah.
again, not being able to get it right. But when you're able to identify that is, something that was, embedded in you as a child that you could never get it right, you then understand this ain't got nothing to do with you.
And the thing about that, the depth of that is that now, right, you can say, okay, well, this is one of the reasons why I do this, right? Because my
Yeah.
mom said this or my dad said that. And this is why I treat my spouse the way I treat.
Yeah.
When you start talking about practicing forgiveness,
Uh-huh.
one of the questions I always ask my guys, depending on who is the offender or somebody that they did to them, whatever, what do you need from that person to overcome what you're dealing with, right?
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Okay.
But
Mhm.
does that person have the capacity to fulfill that need?
That's good.
And and then they like, okay, well, what? Like, and it's like, no, you said you need this closure or need this from your parent to say, or cousin, uncle, whatever. Not talking about
Mhm.
like a super, you know, traumatic or something else that's happened, but like just emotional regulation type stuff, things like that. You said you needed this from them.
Mhm.
Can you honestly tell me today that they're capable of apologizing or validating on doing what you need to them? Because if
Mhm.
they're not, then you're going to have to figure out how you're going to manage that from a forgiveness standpoint to move
Mhm.
forward in your current relationship with your spouse and loved one or with your child or whatever you're dealing with.
Mhm.
And it's tough because then even like, okay, well, why did my mom treat me this way, or why did my dad treat me this way? Well, mom and dad didn't have access to therapists that look like us and the language,
Mhm.
and maybe like a lot of times there was life and death with them, so they was in
Mhm.
fight or flight. So when you didn't do the dishes or when you did pick up the nutmeg, right, that was
Mhm.
another thing on top of everything else that they was trying to survive
Yep.
that was going wrong. So they
Yeah.
responded in that way. Now, what do you do with that information?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that we just forgiving them for, just the foolishness or whatever they might have done in the past, but
Yeah.
that's all they had to work with. That's one of the
Mhm.
most enlightening moments when I have conversations with older adults, and folks like from that generation, like 60s, 70s, and things like that. My parents' generation, and then my grandparents' generation and great grandparents, stuff like that. And I have that conversation about mental health with them, right?
Mhm.
The one of the things that stood out to me, this guy was saying, man, he was like, we were just doing the best we had with what we had, and we was trying to
Yeah.
protect, and that's all we
Mhm.
knew. And it just opened my eyes to generational how we process these issues from our parents, our loved ones, our grandparents, or whoever, right? Emotionally, not talking about the really, really bad stuff or domestic violence, things like that, but like the emotional aspect, the mental health aspect of these things. And you really have to sit with that. My dad might have been this way, but
Mhm.
can I blame him for what he grew up with, how he grew up, and what he had access to?
Mhm. Mhm.
I can't carry it no more. I just know I
Mhm.
can't be the same way I was to that he might have been to me, that I'm gonna be to my wife or my children.
Mhm.
I gotta forgive him for that.
Yeah.
And it might be an ongoing. It's some stuff that me and my dad beef, years before, stuff like that was going on. He ain't gonna change. He's not. He that typical black man that grew up in the 70s and 60s. That's
Ooh.
just who he is.
Yeah.
I cannot request or think. No, I'm be honest. My dad, if I ask my dad to do anything I need to do, he'll do it regardless, and he gonna get things done for me. Whatever I say, like I love my dad. My dad is amazing.
Yeah.
My dad is my dad. People know my dad. He on that side of he be wilding sometimes. So, and
Yeah.
we are like two different people,
Yeah.
but I can't, like, it's some stuff that I gotta let go
Yeah.
because that's who he was as a father,
Yeah.
and that's who he's gonna continue to be. And so I can't keep holding on to, well, I need this from him. He should have did this. He should have did that. He did what he did what he could do with what he had, and that was it. And I forgive him for that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that's
Yeah.
a tough pill to swallow when you have to forgive somebody that has done something to you, right?
Mhm.
But they might not have the capacity to give it back to what you need to move forward in the future.
That listen, we could talk 5 more hours about that.
Yeah, yeah,
5 more hours about that because it really does, when we look at it from a perspective of forgiveness, it really does like require us to it's like this comprehensive space that we're in where it requires us to bring in all of the things that we've been talking about today.
yeah,
Because the reality of it is, even if you forgive and you let go, it doesn't mean that the trigger's not going to be there.
yes,
Right.
yes,
And so,
yes,
um,
yes. Which I had to
that
develop parameters around that.
exactly, exactly. And so, being able to sit with those emotions and the hope is right that you have a knowing, right,
Mm-hmm.
you are able to identify when it happens, but there's more and more distance there. You don't
Yeah.
have such a
Yeah.
big emotion
Yeah.
around it when it comes up for you. But it doesn't mean that you're not going to be triggered.
Right.
And so that's why the language is so important, because you have to be able to say to your spouse, you know what, I was triggered in that moment. That
Mm-hmm.
sent me back to that emotional regulation piece is so important, because you have to be able to say to yourself, this ain't even about me picking up the nutmeg instead of the cinnamon.
Right.
This is about that other situation, but I didn't let that go,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. 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 Exactly.
And then it is also about um being able to sometimes even forgive yourself that you still feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, damn, why is that still triggering me? Like, why is that
Yeah.
still showing up? Like
Yeah.
that grace, to even forgive yourself. But that's why it's so important to, you know, have those safe spaces, but also have an individual therapist that you can speak to, because these moments in any relationship will come up again, even with your family members who have offended you, and something may feel the same,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you have to remind yourself that it is not the same. That's a whole situation. And I tell clients all the time that when you're triggered, you have to be very practical with your steps,
Mm-hmm.
like when you first are learning to work through the things,
Mm-hmm.
because it'll take you time to kind of go in and out what that looks like for you. But if you're able to conceptualize that process for yourself, the likelihood of you showing up that way is greater.
Right. Right.
So no, I think that that's a whole thing that we bring to relationships.
Yeah.
And these are the things, in this popcorn society where we want stuff, I want to fall in love with you, I meet you one day and we
Yeah.
spending every
Yeah.
day together. We living in a fairy tale that I just don't subscribe to.
Yeah. Not at all. It's tough work. It's tough work.
Because there's a lot of things, a
Yeah.
lot of work,
It's tough
a
work.
lot of things that are happening, beneath the surface, and this whole idea of love bombing and you're the greatest person that I ever met. You only know me 2 days, baby. I can't
Yeah.
be, you know.
Boy, there's some skeletons in the closet. Might not know. Got to find that out, boy. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. So
yeah.
yeah.
But this has been an amazing talk. I mean, I think we can go on. We were supposed to end this about 20 minutes ago. I'm sending to
Yeah.
a whole situation. Um, but yeah, I think, man, I'm hopeful that this conversation was, you know, not too dense to the point where it's like it's not palatable to understand what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Relationships do take work. Um,
Yeah.
and then, just it takes work to just learn ourselves. And
Hmm.
that can be tiring at times. And so we have to give ourselves grace, give our loved ones grace. And I think just practicing grace and patience is going to be one of the key ways of surviving as we move forward throughout, our life journey and stuff like that. So, um, Pearl, let them know where they can find you at, social media handles, your website if they want therapy, all that good stuff, so they can find if they want to get involved.
Absolutely. So my practice is pinnacleofpurposecounseling.com. We are on all social media platforms at Pinnacle of Purpose. And then you can go and follow me, Pearl Robinson, at the Social Work Therapist on Instagram.
Nice, nice thing. Definitely go follow her. And if you, like I said, if you're looking for resources, follow on IG, and then also a website looking for therapy resources as well. You can reach out to them if you're in the state of Texas. I think I got a colleague down there I used to work with. I think she's down in Texas. I want to say she's somewhere either in Houston or a little bit outside of Houston. Is that close to where you are at?
That's close.
I'm gonna make some connections because she wants
Absolutely.
to do some other things as well in social work, and I think you'll be a great
Perfect.
fit for her. So I'm gonna reach out to her once this episode drops.
Perfect.
Again, like, share, subscribe to the podcast. Let me know what you think about this topic. If you got comments, please feel free to comment. Questions, feel free to reach out. Let us know. We're also on the YouTube as well, G.Taylor Show. And again, like I said, if you're looking for therapy resources, you have a therapist right in front of you with Pearl. If you're out in Texas as well, and again, we're both DSW students, so hopefully we publish some research, putting some workshops
Yes.
out there together. You know what I'm saying? And making this thing move. Per, I appreciate you for reaching
Yes.
out, setting up the conversation and the content of the questions. This was a great conversation.
Yeah.
Even if I did go off on a tangent, but I do that a lot.
I as well.
Yeah, so this has been an amazing time, man. And so, but yeah, good stuff. Everybody have a great week, and we will talk soon. All right, take care.